In a world where fear ruled the battlefield, and giants silenced armies with their roar, one boy dared to believe that God was bigger than the impossible. It was a time when warriors trembled, kings lost courage, and the people of God stood frozen by doubt. For 40 long days, the valley echoed with the taunts of a giant, Goliath, a towering warrior clothed in iron, whose voice thundered like war drums. No man dared face him. No heart was strong enough. But then came David, not a soldier, not a man of rank or armor, just a shepherd boy carrying bread, a sling, and an unshakable faith. While others saw a giant too big to defeat, David saw a target too big to miss. This is not just the story of a boy and a giant, it's the story of faith over fear, courage over doubt, and God's power working through the unlikely. It's the story that reminds every heart that no matter how impossible the battle may seem, the battle belongs to the Lord. In the valley where giants fall and faith rises, destiny begins, and history is rewritten by the hand of a shepherd who dared to believe. The morning sun rose over the rugged hills of Judah, its golden light spilling into the valley of Elah, a place that would soon become the stage of one of history's greatest confrontations. On one side of the valley stood the army of Israel, their tents scattered across the hilltop, the banner of King Saul fluttering weakly in the wind. The air was thick with tension and dust, the smell of iron and sweat, and the heavy silence of men who had forgotten their courage. Across the valley, the Philistine army stood tall and arrogant, their armor gleaming like bronze fire beneath the sun. And every morning, as the first light broke, their champion stepped forward, Goliath of Gath, a giant among men. He towered nearly 10 feet tall, his presence alone enough to strike terror into even the bravest hearts. His armor was massive, a coat of bronze that weighed as much as a man, and a spear so large that its shaft looked like a tree trunk. Each step he took thundered across the valley floor. For 40 days, morning and evening, Goliath walked out from the Philistine ranks and mocked the armies of Israel. His voice rolled like thunder through the valley as he roared, "Choose a man to fight me. If he kills me, we will be your servants. But if I kill him, you will serve us." Each word echoed like a curse through the Israelite camp. Warriors who had once sung of victory now trembled. Even King Saul, the tallest and strongest among them, stood frozen, his confidence shattered. Fear spread like wildfire, and courage melted like wax in the heat of the giant's challenge. No one dared move. No one dared answer. Each day began the same: the rising of the sun, the roar of the giant, and the silent shame of an army too afraid to fight. The valley that once echoed with the songs of Israel's victories now whispered only defeat. Goliath's laughter filled the air, cruel and proud. He cursed Israel's God, mocked their faith, and spat on their hope. His armor glimmered like a false god, and his arrogance poisoned the hearts of men. It wasn't just a physical battle, it was a war of faith, and Israel was losing without even drawing a sword. In those 40 long days, the soldiers of Israel grew weary. They had seen war before, but never like this, never against something so impossible, so monstrous. Their weapons felt useless, their prayers unanswered. They had forgotten what it meant to believe that their God was greater than any enemy. And yet, beyond the valley, far from the noise and the fear, a young shepherd tended his sheep on the hills of Bethlehem, unaware that destiny was calling his name. While mighty men trembled before a giant, a boy with a sling and a song was preparing to change the story forever. Far from the shouts of soldiers and the clash of fear, in the rolling hills of Bethlehem, a young shepherd named David walked among his father's sheep. The air was calm there, clean, filled with the soft bleating of lambs and the gentle whisper of the wind through the grass. David was the youngest son of Jesse, a man respected in Bethlehem. While his older brothers served in King Saul's army, David spent his days watching over the flock, armed with nothing more than a staff, a sling, and an unshakable faith in God. He was a boy of courage, but not because of his strength, it was because of his trust. Every sunrise found David singing songs to the Lord, his harp echoing across the valleys. He had seen danger before, lions and bears that had tried to snatch away his sheep, yet each time, God had given him the strength to fight and overcome. He had learned that victory didn't come from muscle or armor, but from faith and obedience. His heart was humble, yet fierce in its devotion to God. While others might have dismissed him as just a boy, heaven saw something far greater, a king in the making. One day, David's father called out to him. "David," Jesse said, "take this roasted grain and these loaves of bread to your brothers at the battlefield. See how they are and bring back word from them." It was a simple errand, or so it seemed. But in God's plan, ordinary moments often lead to extraordinary callings. David rose early the next morning, left his sheep in the care of another shepherd, and set out for the valley of Elah. The road was long and dusty, filled with travelers and whispers of war. Yet David's steps were light. He had no fear in his heart, only curiosity and purpose. As he neared the camp, he heard the noise before he saw it, the metallic clank of armor, the shouts of soldiers, and the deep, echoing voice of a man mocking Israel's army. He ran to the front lines just in time to see Goliath step forward once again, his shadow swallowing the valley. David froze, not from fear, but from disbelief. The giant wasn't just insulting men, he was defying the living God. His heart burned with righteous anger. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine," he asked the soldiers near him, "that he should defy the armies of the living God?" The men stared at him, some amused, others irritated. His oldest brother, Eliab, turned sharply and scolded him. "Why have you come here? Who's watching the sheep? I know your pride, you just came to watch the battle." But David's eyes didn't waver. He wasn't there to watch, he was there because faith doesn't stay silent when God's name is mocked. He looked around at Israel's soldiers, trained men, armed and ready, yet frozen by fear. David couldn't understand it. How could the people of God tremble before one man when the Lord Almighty stood with them? And so, in that moment, surrounded by doubters and warriors alike, something awakened within him, a divine courage. He didn't yet know how or when, but deep in his heart, David knew this battle wasn't just another fight, it was his moment to prove that faith, not fear, defines the victor. As the echo of Goliath's challenge rolled through the valley once more, the men of Israel stepped back, their faces pale with fear. Not one dared to move, not one dared to speak. But in the midst of trembling soldiers and fearful whispers stood David, the shepherd boy whose faith burned brighter than the sun over Elah. His eyes followed the giant's every movement, the swagger in his step, the gleam of his armor, the arrogance in his voice, and something deep within David refused to stay silent any longer. He turned to the men beside him and asked, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel?" The soldiers looked at him with disbelief, as if he were a fool. But word of his boldness spread quickly through the camp until it reached the ears of King Saul. When Saul sent for him, David entered the royal tent, a young boy in shepherd's clothes standing before a weary king dressed for battle. The tent was silent except for the flicker of lamps and the hum of anxious soldiers outside. Saul studied him with a mix of curiosity and concern. Finally, the king spoke, his voice heavy with doubt. "You are only a boy," he said. "And he has been a warrior since his youth." David didn't hesitate. His voice was calm but confident. "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep," he began. "When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it down, and killed it." Saul's eyes widened slightly as David continued, his faith unshakable. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." There was something different about this boy. He didn't speak like a dreamer or a fool. He spoke like a man who knew his God, not by words, but by experience. Saul, desperate for hope, finally nodded. "Go," he said quietly, "and may the Lord be with you." The king's servants brought out Saul's own armor, a bronze helmet, a heavy coat of mail, and a mighty sword. They placed them upon David, but the moment he tried to walk, he stumbled. The armor was too heavy, too foreign. He shook his head and removed it piece by piece. "I cannot go in these," he said gently. "I am not used to them." Instead, David took what he knew best, his shepherd's staff, his sling, and 5 smooth stones he picked from a nearby brook. Each stone fit perfectly in his hand, a quiet symbol of faith against the arrogance of steel. As David stepped out of the tent, the camp fell silent. Soldiers watched in disbelief as the boy walked toward the valley floor, the sound of his footsteps steady, fearless. No armor. No sword. Just a sling and a faith that the world could not understand. Above him, Goliath's laughter echoed once again, shaking the air. But this time, someone was walking toward the laughter, not away from it. And though the odds were impossible, David's heart whispered what his soul already knew: the battle was not his, it was the Lord's. The valley fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as the boy with a sling walked out to face the giant. David's footsteps were steady, each one echoing against the rocks of Elah like a drumbeat of destiny. Across the field, Goliath emerged from the Philistine lines, his armor glinting in the sun, his laughter booming like thunder. He was an image of invincibility, a living mountain of muscle and metal. Behind him, thousands of Philistine soldiers cheered. Behind David, the armies of Israel watched in stunned disbelief. As David drew closer, Goliath sneered. His deep voice rumbled, dripping with mockery. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" he roared, pointing at David's staff. He cursed him in the names of his gods, his every word meant to crush whatever courage the boy had left. "Come here," he growled, "and I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild beasts." But David didn't flinch. His eyes locked on the giant, fearless and unwavering. He had heard those same growls before, from lions and bears in the wilderness. He knew this battle wasn't about size or strength. It was about God's glory. Lifting his voice so all could hear, David declared, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin. But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." The words cut through the air like lightning. Even the Philistines went silent. For the first time, someone had spoken back to the giant, not with fear, but with faith. Then, without hesitation, David ran toward Goliath. His sling spun in the air, a blur of movement guided by unseen strength. He reached into his pouch, pulled out a smooth stone, and released it with perfect precision. The stone flew, swift, silent, unstoppable, and struck Goliath squarely in the forehead. The sound echoed like the crack of thunder. Goliath's mocking grin froze. His massive frame swayed, his eyes widened, and then, with a roar that shook the ground, the giant fell face down to the earth. Silence blanketed the valley. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, slowly, David approached the fallen warrior, drew the giant's own sword, and cut off his head, the symbol of total victory. The Philistines stared in horror. Their champion, their pride, was gone. Panic erupted, and the mighty army turned to flee. The men of Israel, once paralyzed by fear, now surged forward with triumphant shouts, chasing the enemy down the valley. That day, a shepherd with no armor and no sword brought down a nation's terror. But David knew it wasn't by his strength or skill. He had simply done what faith demanded, step forward and trust God completely. As the dust settled and the cheers of Israel rose to heaven, one truth stood eternal in the hearts of all who witnessed it. The battle is the Lord's. The valley that once echoed with Goliath's laughter now trembled with the roar of victory. Dust and sunlight danced in the air as the Philistine army fled in terror, their confidence shattered by the fall of one man, their greatest warrior. The Israelites, who moments before had been frozen in fear, now surged forward like a rising tide. Their shouts shook the earth as they chased their enemies beyond the valley, all the way to the gates of Ekron and Gath, the cities that had once sent forth their champion. And at the heart of the battlefield stood David, still and breathless, his sling hanging loosely by his side. The air was thick with silence and awe. Around him lay the fallen giant, motionless, silent, defeated. David bent down, his hand steady, and drew Goliath's own massive sword from its sheath. With a single stroke, he cut off the giant's head, a sign to all of Israel and every watching nation that God had delivered victory into the hands of a shepherd. When David lifted the giant's head high, the cheers of the Israelite soldiers thundered across the valley. Tears mixed with dust on their faces as they shouted his name. The fear that had paralyzed them for 40 days had vanished, replaced by a faith rekindled, by the courage born of seeing what God could do through one obedient heart. David did not linger to boast or celebrate. He carried the giant's head as proof of God's triumph and brought it before King Saul. The king, still seated in disbelief, watched the young boy approach, his tunic stained with the dust of battle, his eyes still blazing with quiet strength. Saul's voice trembled as he asked, "Whose son are you, young man?" David bowed his head humbly and replied, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." No pride. No arrogance. Only reverence and gratitude. For David knew that the victory did not belong to him, it belonged to the Lord Almighty who had guided the stone, silenced the giant, and turned fear into faith. News of the victory spread swiftly through Israel. Songs rose in the streets, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands," and a shepherd's name was spoken in every home. But David didn't chase glory. He had faced the impossible and had seen what God could do with a willing heart. That moment in the valley of Elah would not only mark his rise but would forever define the spirit of true faith. For in that single act, David proved a timeless truth, that God doesn't choose the qualified, He qualifies the chosen. The world had seen a boy defeat a giant, but heaven had seen the birth of a king. Years later, when David would sit upon Israel's throne, he would still remember that day, the sling, the stones, the valley, and the moment faith became victory. And through every battle that followed, one truth would echo in his heart just as it echoes in ours today. The Lord does not save with sword or spear, for the battle belongs to Him. In the valley where fear once reigned, a shepherd's faith rewrote history. One boy, armed not with armor, but with belief, proved that God's power shines brightest when human strength runs out. David didn't win because he was stronger. He won because he believed when no one else would. While an army saw a giant too big to fight, David saw a God too great to fail. And from that day on, the world learned a truth that still shakes the walls of fear and doubt. Giants don't fall because we are mighty, they fall because God is faithful. The sling was simple, the stone was small, but faith made them unstoppable. So when life's giants rise, when doubt roars louder than hope, and fear towers over faith, remember the boy in the valley who dared to run toward the impossible. Because the same God who stood with David still stands with you. The battle was never David's. It was, and will always be, the Lord's.